So let's get started with warehouse connectors. So warehouse connectors in Mixpanel are a way for you to load your warehouse data directly into Mixpanel, and it allows you to load different types of data, different types of tables. So we'll get into that in a bit. Before that, if you want to sync your data from your warehouse to Mixpanel, just navigate to project settings and choose warehouse sources from the left menu. And what they're gonna allow you to do is sync your data directly from warehouse to Mixpanel. You can enrich user profiles with additional data that's stored in your warehouse. You can also keep your event data updated and reflect changes over time, such as, let's say, status changes, transaction changes. As of now, Mixpanel currently just supports data import from 4 warehouses, which is BigQuery, Snowflake, Databricks, and Redshift. It does not support any other tool out of the blue. Okay, now moving on to table types. So there are 4 table types, right? So there's an event table type, there's a user profile table type, there's a group profiles, and then there's lookup tables. So the events table is used for you to just sync data from your warehouse to Mixpanel in the form of events, right? Now, things to keep in mind is that when you're syncing an event table to Mixpanel, you need 2 columns. The first one being user ID, which is it would map it. It's for understanding which user profile on Mixpanel should all of those events go to, right? So let's take a quick example. So let's say the user ID is ansh@gmail.com, for example. So when Mixpanel loads that data from the warehouse, it's gonna see if the ansh@gmail.com exists, as a user profile. If it exists, it'll send that event to that profile. If it does not exist, it'll just create a new user ID or a new profile. The second one is timestamp. So you need a timestamp that specifies when the event occurred, and that is what will be used to set the time for the event in Mixpanel. No, it's usually helpful to set the timestamp in UTC in your table and then send it to Mixpanel, and then Mixpanel will automatically update it to the project time zone that you have. So let's say in your project settings, your time zone is IST or US Central. It's automatically going to change that timestamp to that time zone, and it will assume that the timestamp that you're giving it is in UTC. So you need to keep that in mind. Other column such as event properties are optional, but ideally you might want to have it. So you can specify an event name. You can also specify a device ID. So the device ID is usually useful if your data includes anonymous users. So you can add a device ID column to track users before they authenticate. So for example, you have 2 tables, one table has device ID as the user ID because, they're anonymous users. And then there's another ID where you have the actual, let's say, email, which is the user ID. Now, ideally, you would want to merge these 2 users into the same profile, right? And how you're going to do that is that when you send the sign up table to Mixpanel, you need to ensure that you also include the device ID along with the user ID, so that Mixpanel will just merge those 2 profiles into a single profile. Okay, great. In terms of how it looks, this is how the setup looks, where you can choose your source, your data set, your table view, and then here is where you can map your columns. You can enter an event name, event time, user ID, and a device ID, and then you can add other mappings if you'd like to. Okay, now we'll move to user profiles. Sorry, give me a sec. Okay, now we'll move to user profiles. So when using user profiles, you can basically sync your user data from your warehouse to Mixpanel. So let's say, you have additional properties in your warehouse, or you just want to send some properties, you can use the user profiles. The only required column here is actually the user ID. So just so that Mixpanel understands, okay, which user profile it needs to update. And so all other columns are optional, but obviously, you need to add columns for whichever data you want to update. Interesting thing here is, so in user profile, there are 2 types of table. So the first table is a standard table, and the second one is a history table. So standard table is, it will basically just override the previous existing user property values with the most recent data. And so it does not store any historical records, and it's useful only when you need the latest user information. This is essentially what profile properties exactly are, what we also spoke about initially. But through warehouse connectors, Mixpanel also gives you the option to use a history table, which actually stores your changes over time by including timestamp fields. So it's usually beneficial for tracking time sensitive properties like subscription end dates, when did the user upgrade, or when did their status change, etc. And so Mixpanel would track a timestamp with each of the changes to understand when it occurred. Okay, the next type of tables we have is group profile tables, right? So with the group profile table types, you can again sync group level event data to Mixpanel or user level data, right? But the only additional thing is that it would have a group key so that all of the changes that are happening within a specific group, right? That's it. And like rest, everything remains same to how an event table is or a user table is in group profiles. The last table you have is a lookup table. So you can also use lookup tables via warehouse connectors to make it dynamic. So initially we spoke about how you can upload a CSV, but that's more or less static, or for you to have to go and constantly keep updating it. If you want that to be dynamic, you could actually just use the warehouse connector lookup table, where it's again, the setup is very, very similar. So you have two fields that you need to enter. So the first one is the join key. Join key is the unique identifier from your warehouse data, which corresponds to the Mixpanel property, right? So the values in that join key would actually correspond to a Mixpanel property. And the Mixpanel property is where you just need to choose the Mixpanel property that the join key will actually end up mapping to. And then when they match, the data from the warehouse will actually enrich that property with new or updated information. Another interesting thing in warehouse connectors is the sync mode. So you can choose how you want to sync your data, and Mixpanel offers 4 sync modes. The first one is the mirror mode. So the mirror mode basically keeps Mixpanel perfectly synchronized with the data in your warehouse. This means that any changes that happen, whether to your new data, updates to existing data, or deleted data, will actually also reflect in Mixpanel. For example, there's a payment event, the status could change over time from, let's say, pending to successful. With mirror, every time the status updates, Mixpanel will reflect the latest value and remove rows that are deleted from your warehouse. The second one is append. So the append mode only loads new rows from your warehouse to Mixpanel. So any modification of existing rows or that have been deleted will actually be ignored, and no changes would take place there. And this is usually useful when you just want to add new data, but don't care if previous entries are updated or deleted. That's when you should be using append. Full mode is usually when Mixpanel actually reloads the entire table from your warehouse into Mixpanel each time it runs, rather than only tracking changes between syncs. It's primarily used for lookup tables or user profiles or group profiles. Reason being because that's when you would want to just refresh everything. And so this is usually useful when you want to have a refresh of your data. Okay, the last one is one-time table. So one-time mode loads your data into Mixpanel only once, with no ability to send incremental changes afterwards. So this is recommended, when you're usually trying to transfer data from a temporary warehouse that won't be updated later. And you would ideally use this when you're just migrating and you just want to perform a one-off effort.